Hey, 10th graders, as promised, we are going to start diving into our grammar as another component of writing that we're working on. Specifically, what I want to do is make sure that we're writing good sentences and that we're using punctuation correctly. Even more specifically, that means commas, which are tough and can be challenging to use and to remember when to use them. So in order to do that, I want to make sure we kind of go back a couple of steps and review a few things from last year so that ultimately when I start talking about where to place commas, we have a common vocabulary for what that looks like. So today we're going to talk briefly about clauses and phrases. So I just want to go back even further before clauses and phrases to talk about something that hopefully you all know, which is that sentences always have to contain subjects and predicates. Subjects are what the sentence is about. These can be nouns, a person, place, or a thing, or an idea, of course, or they could be pronouns, which as a recap, those are words that take the place of nouns. So things like I takes the place for my first name, Adam. You takes the place of your first name. They, things like that, take the place for a group of people. Also, it is a really common pronoun. We use it kind of as an ambiguous pronoun sometimes, but it is taking the place of a noun. Predicates are basically verbs. That's what I want you to think about. Phrases of verbs that demonstrate whatever it is that the subject is doing or what state of being the subject is in. Okay, so if you can't always remember what a predicate is, just think subject, verb, subject, verb, subject, verb. Every single sentence needs it. Every single clause needs it. Okay, so if we take a look at just a few fast examples of this, since you covered all of this hopefully in ninth grade, in simple sentences, really easy short sentences, all of them have subjects. Those are in bold on there, and then their predicate, the verb phrase that follows the subject or that describes the subject, is underlined. So in this first one, I want to go to a haunted house. I is our subject, want to go is our predicate or our verb, and then we want to go where? To a haunted house. Odysseus from the Odyssey was kind of a jerk sometimes, which he was if you ever read the Odyssey. Odysseus is our subject, was is our verb. Now, this verb, just as a fast reminder, is not really an action word, right? This is a little bit more complicated, and again, you should know this comes from the verb to be, which describes a state of being. I am, you are, he is, things like that. Okay, we conjugate it in that way, but those are all verbs. So just be mindful of that because often we build sentences with some form of to be. Finally, Shakespeare wrote awesome poetry. Shakespeare, subject, wrote a more traditional action verb as our predicate. Now, in compound and complex sentences, right, where we start bridging small little fragments together to create better and more interesting writing, you can have more than one subject and more than one predicate. So, for example, I want to go to a haunted house, but my friends want to go to a scary movie. In the first part of this sentence, I is my subject, want to go is my predicate verb phrase. In the second part of my sentence, friends is my subject, want to go is my verb phrase. Okay, so you can have multiple ones, and we're going to learn about how those are divided up or recap how those are divided up in just a moment. Again, Odysseus is my subject, was is my predicate verb. Kind of a jerk sometimes. Now part two of the sentence, because he, subject, by the way, he is acting as a pronoun, taking the place for his name. Always wanted, my predicate verb. So again, you can have multiple subjects, you can have multiple predicate verbs. All right, so leading into clauses, which again is hopefully review. Clauses, though, if we're thinking about sentences and sentence structure, clauses are groups of words that have subjects and predicates. That sounds pretty much like what we just recapped with a sentence. A sentence always has to have a subject and a predicate. The reason that we call clauses something else, though, is because there are two types. Clauses that can be their own sentences and stand on their own with a period at the end are called independent clauses. Clauses that have a subject and a predicate but can't stand on their own in a sentence because they wouldn't make sense are called dependent clauses. So this is what they look like. Independent clauses, again, are clauses that can stand as individual sentences. So if I just create some simple sentences, all of these are full sentences, but all of them are also considered independent clauses. The high school that I used to teach at in Connecticut is called Darien High School. That is my subject, is is my verb from to be. The best in Connecticut, I have a subject, I have a verb, my sentence makes sense. This is an independent clause. Mr. Wallenfang's apartment, that's my subject, was haunted. That's my verb for a night. Someday I'll tell you that story. It's far less interesting than it sounds, but that is an independent clause as well as a simple sentence. Let's take a look at the next one. Halloween, subject, is, from the verb to be, predicate, an awesome holiday. Now I got a part two to this sentence though. But Thanksgiving, new subject, is, new predicate, even better. Now I have an independent clause 1 followed by an independent clause 2. They're linked. We're going to talk about that link in a moment, but both of these are considered independent clauses because I could take Halloween as an awesome holiday, put a period there, and boom, that sentence makes sense. Thanksgiving is even better, put a period there, sentence makes sense. If it follows Halloween is an awesome holiday, what I'm trying to say very simply is that is also an independent clause that would work out on its own too. So we can link together two independent clauses. Now, how do we link them together though? We use coordinating conjunctions, or as you have probably learned them, these are the good old fanboys. If you remember what all of those stand for, we have for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. That creates fanboys, obviously, right? So these fanboys are used to link together independent clauses, and here's where commas come into play. Anytime you link together two independent clauses with a fanboy, a coordinating conjunction, a comma must always come before that fanboy. Okay, just like in these examples here. Bella was torn between Edward and Jacob, comma, but she chose Edward in the end. Bella, subject, was torn, predicate phrase verb. But links it to the independent clause 2. She, subject, pronoun for Bella, chose, predicate verb in independent clause 2. So I've got one independent clause, second independent clause, and they are joined by comma, but, a coordinating conjunction. In the next example, Edward is like 100 years old and he's still like 17-year-old Bella, which is why I think Twilight will always be creepy. Edward, subject, is, verb from to be, like 100 years old. He, subject, pronoun for Edward. Likes is my predicate verb. And we're linked here by and to join together those two independent clauses. So the rule is coordinating conjunctions. The fanboys can join together two independent clauses, and they must always have a comma. We'll be recapping that comma rule later. Okay, I guess I just read this slide already. When is something a coordinating conjunction? When it follows a comma and joins two independent clauses. And we can't forget to start using those commas. Okay, the last thing that I want to talk about in recap today, before we dive further into commas coming up, is the second type of clause, which is a dependent clause. Dependent clauses still have subjects, still have predicates. To be a clause, you must always have both of those things. But dependent clauses don't make sense if you tried to force them to be their own sentence. They depend on independent clauses. Sometimes you hear these referred to as subordinating clauses or subordinate clauses. I like dependent when I'm talking about it in class because they depend on their buddy, the independent clause. So here are some examples of what this looks like. Darien High School is the best since we're all so smart. Part 1, Darien High School subject is my predicate verb, the best. That's an independent clause. If I put a period there, that makes sense on its own. But I've got the second part to this, since we're all so smart. If I tried to take that, I could say, well, we have we, subject. Then we've got a contraction. This is really are. That's a verb from to be. So we have a subject and a predicate. We got a clause. But if we said, since we're all so smart and put a period, it doesn't make sense on its own. It's missing something. That's because this is depending on that. This is the dependent clause. The next example. After a glass broke in the sink, Mr. Wallenfang's apartment was haunted for a night. So let's just go back to where we started. Mr. Wallenfang's apartment, subject, was haunted, predicate verb for a night. I put a period at the end of just that part, makes sense on its own. That's an independent clause. Okay, but we've got that first part that leads into the sentence. After a glass broke in the sink. Glass, subject, broke, predicate verb. But if I try to put a period right here, after a glass broke in the sink, it doesn't make sense. It's missing something, and you know it's missing something while you're waiting for, so what happened? That's where the independent clause comes in. So this is a dependent clause. Finally, Halloween is an awesome holiday because it's fun. Halloween, subject, is, verb. We saw that already. If I put a period here, of course, independent clause, we already identified that. Because it's fun, it, subject, in the contraction. This is, which is the predicate verb from the verb to be. Because it's fun, period, doesn't make sense on its own. Therefore, this is a dependent clause. It must be linked to an independent clause. Thankfully, there are some keywords that you can look for when you're trying to identify what a dependent clause is. These are all conjunction words. I talk about them sometimes too as a shortcut. This isn't technically grammatically correct, but as transition words or phrases. So after, although, as if, because, all of those things you may have learned as transition words in earlier stages of your writing. All of those generally signal you've got a dependent clause coming. And we want to be able to identify these independent and dependent clauses because they really kind of control where we put commas. And that's the next thing that we're going to learn in grammar.